All right, good evening, everyone. This January 4th, 2022 meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck?
Here.
Councilors Rapp?
Here.
Mans?
Here.
Mboop?
Here.
Wendland?
Here.
Wynn?
Here.
And Councilor Burdick is here and joining us via Zoom.
All right, thank you so much. And everyone now, let's please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our first order of business this evening is electing our council president for the 2022 year, and I would like to nominate Councilor Wendland to be the council president. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Thank you, Councilor Mans. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And Councilor Burdick. We feel you out there. I'm sure saying aye as well. All right. Congratulations, Councilor Wendland.
Bravo!
I have some comments.
Next on the agenda is public comment. Ms. Leonard, do we have anyone for public comment?
No, Mayor.
Okay, all right. All right, then next we have a presentation. This month on January 17th, we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. As part of the commemoration, we have a proclamation, which I will now read. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the foremost leader of the modern American civil rights movement and one of the greatest advocates for racial equality, social and economic justice and human rights in the history of the nation, was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. King embraced the practice of nonviolent civil disobedience as an effective means of exposing and overcoming institutional racism, prejudice, and injustice. When faced with adversity and physical imprisonment, he did not waver and continued to serve as a pillar of the community, illustrating the fact that the flame of hope within us all will not be stamped out by those who aim to marginalize. We also recognize the family of Dr. King, who shared with him the world while living through adversity, threats, constant fear, and violent acts that were only amplified by their father's unrelenting quest for equality. More often than not, throughout history, those who suffer the most from the actions of the righteous are the ones who follow the closest. We thank them for that sacrifice and for the legacy they continue to carry on in Dr. King's honor to this day. Our city is strengthened when our residents stand on the shoulders of Dr. King to make their voices heard. And as they cast light on the darkness of injustice, hate, and intolerance that remain, we remember the example he set decades ago. May his enduring memory inspire the continued work needed to lift the oppressed from poverty, to seek peace in countries and communities torn by violence and war, and to end racism and class discrimination that continue to inhibit all from reaching their full, free potential, constitutionally guaranteed to all. Dr. King embodied the moral responsibility we share as citizens to seek justice for the marginalized and oppressed, as he set aside personal discomforts and inconveniences in the name of a good greater than himself. We draw on his lessons that courage now will lead to a better day tomorrow. The hopes of those who listen to his message remain alive today as the current world reminds us that our duty to provide a voice to those silenced in the face of seemingly insurmountable barriers is reverberated in the resilience of Dr. King's message and shepherded forward by his courageous leadership. Dr. King reminded us that, quote, everyone can be great because anybody can serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. May his strength live in each one of us, his message continue to empower new generations of leaders, and his legacy inspire service to others. We invite you to join us in honoring Dr. King by viewing a pre-recorded program hosted jointly by the local Baha'i community and our own city library, starting on Monday, January 10th. A silent walk hosted by Respond to Racism in partnership with the city will also take place at Millennium Park Plaza on January 16th at 2 p.m. Details for both events can be found on the city's website, and we hope that you will partake in both of these events with us. Now therefore be it resolved that we, the Lake Oswego City Council, proclaim January 17th, 2022 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we call upon the people of the city of Lake Oswego to join their fellow residents across the United States in observing this day with civic, community, and service programs in honor of his life and lasting legacy. All right. Okay, and our next item of business this evening is a public hearing on Ordinance 2847, which are some text code amendments to conform to National Flood Management Insurance Program. I'll invite Mr. Espy and Mr. Amsbury forward, and Mr. Espy will deliver the staff report. This is a public hearing. I think we'll have Attorney Luce kind of read the program for us here before we start with the report.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a legislative hearing, Mayor, so individuals have up to 5 minutes to speak, should they choose.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to have the staff report. In this case, the city, of course, is the applicant in this matter. So as I understand, there's no applicant presentation, just the, is that correct, Mr. Ansber? Okay. Staff report. So after the staff report, if any the councilors have questions, that will be the time to answer, and then we'll take testimony. All right. Mr. Espy, please.
Thank you. Mayor Buck, members of the council, good evening. We have before us the proposed revisions of the code sections related to the flood management overlay to conform with the National Flood Insurance Program. No amendments to the flood hazard map are proposed, and no development is proposed with this application. At their hearing on September 27th, the Planning Commission adopted findings and recommended approval for the proposed amendments. This presentation is similar to the one provided to the Planning Commission, and Rob Amsbury, who is here with me this evening, can provide answers to any of the more technical questions that you might have. Staff received written testimony from Mark Heiser at 18345 Heatherand Court and has been entered into the record as Exhibit G4. Similar testimony was presented by Mr. Heiser at the Planning Commission, and he is again indicating that he does not support the proposed code amendments unless concerns regarding the flood mapping have been resolved.
Excuse me, can you pull the mic a little closer to your mouth, please?
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. In response, staff finds that the flood insurance is a federal government program, and FEMA is in the final authority on how local governments control their flood management. While the city is aware that some flood maps may need to be updated, the city cannot embark on this project until the code changes before you this evening have been adopted. Our current flood management code language currently does not comply with FEMA requirements, and it's the reason these proposed changes are being proposed. An email from FEMA dated July 8th, 2021 was provided to staff showing that FEMA supports the proposed changes. These changes were reviewed and recommended by the Planning Commission at their meeting on September 27th, and FEMA will provide a formal notification once the ordinance has been adopted by council. The consequences of voting against these amendments is that we would continue with code language that is out of FEMA compliance, and we are unable to make the necessary changes to the flood mapping until our ordinance meets FEMA standards. From there, with council's recommendation, we will work with FEMA on updating the maps. And, so for reference, this is the flood hazard map of Lake Oswego and surrounding unincorporated areas in Clackamas County. It shows the Willamette River over here, and I don't know if my mouse is working. Anyway, it shows the Willamette River, the Tualatin River, the Oswego Canal, and Oswego Lake. Zone AE is the special flood hazard area where the base flood elevation is determined and corresponds with the 100-year flood zone. Zone X is where a 0.2% annual chance of flood hazard is predicted, or the 500-year flood. And Zone A is where no base flood elevation or data is available for that to be determined. The city participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, which aims to reduce the impact of flooding on private and public structures. It achieves this by providing affordable insurance to property owners, renters, and businesses, and by encouraging communities to adopt floodplain regulations. The new model ordinance will be used by FEMA Region 10 and the Department of Land Conservation and Development as a review tool for evaluating local ordinance for NFIP compliance. FEMA now expects local codes to mirror, and in some cases, be verbatim to the federal NFIP rule language. The DLCD has notified the city that it needs to amend its land use regulations related to flood management to be consistent with FEMA's model ordinance. And the DLCD is responsible for administering the statewide planning program, including statewide planning goal 7, which requires that local comprehensive plans and implementing regulations address Oregon's natural hazards. Most local governments address natural hazards in its comprehensive plan by adopting a natural hazards inventory, and local jurisdictions are also responsible for adopting and maintaining land use regulations, implementing their plans consistent with statewide goals. Flood hazard areas are subject to periodic inundation, which may result in loss of life and property and present health and safety hazards and disruption of commerce and governmental services. This can also result in public expenditure for flood protection and relief and impairment of tax base, all of which adversely affect the health, safety, and general welfare of its residents and property owners. The state of Oregon has delegated the responsibility to local governments in ORS 197-175 to adopt floodplain management regulations. And the purpose of continuing the flood management area designation and mapping is to notify potential buyers that the property located within the special flood that property is located within the special flood hazard area. The flood management area designation and mapping also serves to notify those who occupy special flood hazard areas that they assume the responsibility for their actions. Following flood management area requirements will allow property owners to continue to maintain eligibility for flood insurance and disaster relief. This is a list of the code sections that will be revised as a result of us adopting the FEMA model ordinance. The objectives are to restrict development that is dangerous to health, safety, and property, and protect development that is vulnerable to floods. Much of the FEMA Region 10 model ordinance language is pulled verbatim from the code or federal CFR regulations and NFIP language. The DLCD assessed the Lake Oswego Code Section 500511 using the framework required by FEMA Region 10, and the assessment identified several places where the language in the city code does not adequately reflect the minimum NFIP standards. Staff amended the code to be consistent with the model code language provided by FEMA. So in terms of the scope, it would restrict or prohibit development that is dangerous to health, safety, and property from flooding. It would require development vulnerable to floods to be protected against flood damage at the time of initial construction. Controls the alteration of natural floodplains, stream channels, and natural protective barriers which help accommodate or channel floodwaters. To control filling, grading, dredging, and other development that may increase flood damage, and prevent or regulate the construction of flood barriers that will unnaturally divert floodwaters or may increase flood hazards in other areas. In terms of the key changes, we provided a breakdown of the changes found in the 2019 model ordinance. We have used these two slides to summarize those changes. Basically, it would modify the definitions to align with FEMA. It coordinates with state specialty codes and adds floodplain permit review requirements, record retention requirements, FEMA notification requirements, and addresses substantial improvements and substantial damage assessments. It would also change subdivision rules and manufactured dwelling park rules, structures located in multiple or partial flood zones, and riverine flood zones. The riverine flood zone section has been reorganized and then also addresses flood openings as well as garages. Regarding accessory structures and mainly boathouses, the NFIP regulates accessory structures and has established specific language for them. Currently, boathouses are allowed with minimal setback to adjacent property lines and are allowed to straddle the lake property line at this point. The maximum area of a boathouse is set by city code at 600 square feet currently. And the lake court regulations are at 500 square feet. Code has been revised downwards to 500 feet to be consistent with the lake court regulations. Additionally, current code allows for permitted boathouses with finished floor elevations to be set below design flood elevations to be wet flood proof so that they can actually function as a boathouse and access the water. Unfortunately, the model flood hazard ordinance restricts the size of an accessory structure to less than 200 square feet and a minimum setback of 20 feet from all property lines. And this is a significant departure from the boathouses that we see today. And any residential accessory structure that does not meet these requirements needs to be built with the finished floor elevation above the design flood elevation, and wet flood proofing is not an option. So that would be very difficult for a boathouse at this point to achieve. This is a photograph of the typical scenario that we see for boathouses on the lake. This is constructed by two separate property owners but enjoy a common property line. This is an aerial view of those same two boathouses. Boathouses vary anywhere between 400 and 500 square feet. Some of them can be a little bit larger, but generally this is about how big they are. And then this is a plan view that shows the common lot line, common side property line, and then also extending beyond the lake property line in order to facilitate access to the water. To allow a path forward for the continued construction or substantial improvement of traditional style boathouses, the code amendments include a ministerial floodplain variance for boathouses that are greater than 200 square feet. And of course, not more than 500 square feet. And they would be allowed to be wet flood proofed. Once the amended flood management code provisions have been adopted, the city will consider making a request for a community-wide exception for boathouses, which FEMA provides. This will enable a larger group of boathouses to be constructed and substantially remodeled without the necessity of obtaining a variance. Rather, the construction and substantial remodel would be authorized by an exception in the code as approved by FEMA. At this point, however, FEMA has not completed its review of necessary standards and review criteria, and that would need to be addressed before approving a community-wide exception application. So we will need to be in touch with FEMA at a future date, at which time hopefully they will have that in place for the city to consider for an area-wide exception for boathouses. And finally, while the formal deadline for adoption of the ordinance language is January 1st, staff has communicated with the floodplain management specialist for FEMA Region 10 that the ordinance for these code revisions would be adopted a few days after the deadline of January 1st. FEMA has recently reviewed the draft code revisions and found that they are compliant with 44 CFR 60.3 and the model flood ordinance. Following the formal adoption of the code amendments, a formal letter of compliance will in fact be issued by FEMA. And then in light of this evening's testimony, staff is recommending the ordinary course of approval, which is the tentative approval and direction to staff to prepare findings for the January 18th council meeting to address the public testimony or any changes that the council may propose this evening. And that concludes my presentation. I am open for any questions at this point, or Rob would be.
So are we past the deadline now?
Technically, yes.
Technically, yes.
So just to make sure I fully understand. So the federal government came up with this model code recently. It's a new, okay. And did that have anything to do with the issues the National Flood Insurance Program has been having, the complete insolvency and all of that? Is that what it's related to? Them redoing things?
The purpose of the model code that was developed by FEMA was to provide consistency throughout the United States. What they had found is that every participating community, Lake Oswego being one of them, had a different way of approaching it through their code language. And there were things that were not covered in the code. There were things that were, they had issues with as far as allowing development that wasn't approved by the federal rules. So the federal rules have been in place since the late 60s, early 70s. And so what the FEMA has gone and done, they went back and developed a model code that speaks directly to the federal rules in the Federal Registry, and then they adopted the model code, and they have essentially handed that to the state of Oregon. The state aligned it with the Uniform Building Code in the state, fed it back to FEMA. FEMA reviewed it and approved it, and so this is going out statewide for all participating communities, this particular code here.
So when we adopt this and then seek this new concept of an area-wide exemption, will there be any practical changes to how these projects that apply these uses that are impacted by this code change are processed? Or?
The biggest change that I see in our community is that we will require a standalone floodplain permit, development permit. We don't currently require that. We manage the floodplain requirements through land use development and through building code issuance. So those get reviewed at those stages. But one of the problems with our code is there are things that are allowed by the city that FEMA considers development that are not getting caught in a review process. So a good example would be paving Child's Road. Put a 4-inch overlay of asphalt on Child's Road. We don't have a review process for that. We don't have a permit process for that. The county or the city can choose to do that or have in the past, but technically that's a violation because that's a mapped floodway, and you raise the asphalt by 4 inches, you force water onto other properties. So driveways, grading, fences, there's a lot of little subtle allowances that we allow now by code that FEMA wants to have our eyes on from a flood management standpoint.
Okay, so there's a benefit to it going forward, even with the variance and then the assumed exemption when that's.
Certainly.
Okay, because it was a lot of work, but
It's been 2.5 years.
that's crazy. Okay. Councilor Rapp.
I have several questions. Should I just do one at a time, or do you want me to
Yes.
just lob them all at you at once and you have to write it down? Okay. So I'm gonna scratch my question of what is a 100-year flood, because that sounds terrible and it sounds biblical, so we're not even gonna get into that question, so I'm scratching that. So if I understand this right, if one of our community members is building a boathouse and it's over 200 square feet, they're gonna have to apply for a variance. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. The concern I have is currently the maximum length of a boat on the lake is 22 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So a 10 by 20 foot boathouse will not cover a boat on the lake. You're never gonna find anybody on the lake who gets a 20-foot boat. Everyone's gonna get a 22-foot boat. So do we have any way to, this is gonna sound really weird because it's probably never gonna happen, negotiate with FEMA to get that variance to say 2,200 or 220 feet or 250 feet? Because what's gonna happen is every single boathouse is gonna have to apply for a variance. There's no one gonna be building under a 200 square foot boathouse.
Well, we had months of back and forth with FEMA Region 10 on this particular issue, and they did not budge.
They did not budge.
No, what they gave us in the short term is the process to do a floodplain management variance for those boathouses. And so we have discussed this internally, and we will set up a mechanism whereby if you come in for a building permit for your new boathouse or to substantially improve an existing boathouse, you will have to go and take a little bit of paperwork, and we will review those. We will set the criteria and review those, and then that will provide the allowance to build the boathouse in exceedance of FEMA's strict requirements.
Okay. Where's my other note? So through the variance process, that is how the decision is made whether or not it is, quote, the building is, quote, dangerous to health, safety, and property, right? So that's the city decision.
the city's decision
Right.
as far as reviewing the variance.
Right.
Yes.
So FEMA's not gonna be calling up Joe homeowner and saying, hey, it turns out your boathouse that you're building is
No,
dangerous to health, safety, and property. That's not gonna happen?
that's not gonna happen.
Okay, good.
They've assured us that.
That's a good one. Okay, so then the next question I have is currently, I know there's a permitting fee for any building structure for Lake Oswego. I just went through a remodeling process a year and a half ago, so I probably should remember this. But is there a additional fee at the city for anybody to apply for a variance, other than the permitting cost?
The answer to that is yes.
And is that a flat fee, is it a percentage, is it dependent on the project?
We have a fee structure set up for minor and major variance. I'm not exactly sure what the fees are, but the fee is significantly less for a minor variance than it is.
Gotcha, so, so it's complicated, but there are, so currently, any homeowner looking to apply for a variance has to pay some fee on top of the permit.
Correct, for the
Okay.
variances that we have
Correct.
currently. We don't have.
Okay, so then, the last question I have, sorry, council members, I know this is, so then, the only concern I have then with this is, one, if we're forced to do it, why are we even discussing this, right? It's one of those issues. Two, I'm fine with this as long as it doesn't cost our community members more time, more money, or more restrictions on what they want to do. I'm obviously not a fan of any government oversight, right? So if there is going to be a variance process to this, while I don't think there should be an additional cost for that variance, but since we already have a structure in place that all variance applications have a cost, then I would suggest that this does not exceed this current fee mechanism that you already have in place. Does that make sense? So we're not doing this to make more money for the city, right? I don't want that to happen. I don't want people applying for permits to have to wait 6 more weeks because now they gotta surprisingly have to apply for this variance. I want the process to be smooth. I want the city to be prepared and staffed appropriately to be able to handle this because, look, there's only 600 houses on the lake anyway, but it's more work. And so I don't want the community to suffer for the work that we're being forced to do. Does that make sense?
Fair enough.
I understand. Currently, we do not assess any charges for floodplain review and
Okay.
floodplain management. It's provided out of the Surface Water Utility Fund.
Great.
For my position. So the variance we've talked about, formatting the variance.
Uh-oh, Evan's coming up.
I think Evan has
I'm
something
in
to say.
trouble.
We haven't talked about fee associated with that.
Yeah,
And we have talked about making it as simple as possible.
yeah, great.
I just want to emphasize that what we're looking at is a ministerial variance. Unlike any other variance we have, ministerial, which means it's over the counter.
Yeah,
The concept is that we would draft up essentially template findings, because all boathouses will be the same boat, if you will.
Yeah.
Relative to its impact on flood.
Yeah.
Okay, minimal, okay, i.e. none. And so while a person has submitted a building permit application, the variance application would be considered by staff at the same time.
sweet.
We don't have a fee, as they indicated, for ministerial variance at this point, so that's a staff decision.
Great.
Ultimately goes to the council. That's part of your fee resolution process.
Thank you, Evan. Well then, those are my questions, and I would just advocate that we continue with no fee on those variances going forward. But thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Wendland.
So, just so I understand this, the lake is one thing that they have their 500 square foot, and we had a 600 square foot limit. People on the river that want to have a 600 foot, I mean, are we, the lake is one entity, but I think there's people on the river as another entity. Are we going to be changing their life drastically that they should, I mean, do we just go 500 because it was the lake, or was 600 a determiner that we had before that was based on a lot of input and process and something before all of us were born? You know, I mean, I don't want to upset the apple cart from that standpoint.
What I've seen out there is there's typically not boathouses on the rivers. They have docks and the docks are allowed to rise and lower with the tidal influence on the Willamette.
Right.
And I haven't seen any in my time where we've had to review a boathouse on the river. That's not to say that they couldn't build one. They'd have to go through a lot more hoops than just the city to do that as far as the waters of the state. But yes, if we draw this code and limit it to 500 square feet per the lake corpse rules, then the way it's written, that would apply on the Willamette River and the Tualatin River as well.
Okay. I just don't know if those people would even be aware of something like this, and I don't.
So Rob, do we not see, I mean, it seems like a boathouse on the Willamette would be a lot trickier because the Willamette might be at 26 feet today and it might be at 17 feet tomorrow. So unlike the lake where you have consistent elevation year round because of the dam and the
Right, the water level on the canal, well, the canal except when it's flooding, and the lake are static essentially, whereas the rivers, they rise with weather, and they rise, there's tidal influence that affects the river all the way up to the Willamette Falls. So there's a drastic change, and to build a permanent boathouse in the shore, well, there's a lot of requirements. There's green space requirements, there's national marine fisheries, but typically what they'll do is build a ramp out to a dock that's attached to piers, and then it's allowed to rise and lower with the water level.
Right. Okay. Another question I have then is, let's just say you're a person that owns a boathouse right now. We talk city talk and procedures and policy. How much will it change for somebody who already has their boathouse complete and done? That person will not be affected, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's just people that would like to remodel or add a new structure.
Moving
And in that
forward.
case, they would fill out the counter application, and it would be a slight hiccup for them to fill out one more form than what they used to do before. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you don't have any, not that we're bigger than FEMA, because I know we're just very small, but any indication from them that they would be adverse to following our $500 square foot limit? Is that, they're not, I know we need to get this passed.
Right.
So that we can start to talk about the future, but one of my gifts is strategic planning, and I don't necessarily like to commit until I know what the parameters are on the big picture. And so do you feel from your discussions with FEMA that we have a dialogue that will be favorable to our community, that we could figure things out and they would support us?
I believe so.
Okay.
Well, and I just want to, I mean, FEMA has already signed off. We'll get the official letter of sign off once we adopt the ordinance, but we've been in conversations, surprisingly enough, boathouses have consumed an inordinate amount of time. But we've been in conversation with FEMA on the variance process, and they have signed off on it. So.
Okay, and then I guess my last question is really citywide. It's interesting when you bring up Childs Road, if you put 4 or 6 inches of paving, do we have any other obstacles that this would affect that would put us in harm's way from the standpoint of, projects that we have going already, or things that we have planned in the future that this will affect
Well,
adversely? I know that's putting you on the spot. I guess
it's a difficult one to answer. If I clearly understand you, I mean, we have projects that we build in the city, and an example is the water pipeline across the McVeigh Bridge. They were required to develop what's called a no-rise analysis, an engineering analysis to determine that placing the structure there would not adversely affect properties upstream or downstream. We've always required that. This is no different. We will still continue to require that with this code. It will create extra work for some of our municipal projects, but no different than it has in the past, whereby you're developing something in a floodplain, there are already rules in place and regulations in place and processes in place. Another good example is the new sewage treatment plant. They're talking about putting 20,000 yards of fill in there. They're going to have to work with FEMA, National Marine Fisheries, DEQ, and jump through some hoops. But that's with our code today. That doesn't change with the new code. They're still gonna have to go through those processes.
I didn't want to mention the specific project, but I was concerned about that exactly, and I didn't know if this was going to adversely affect that, so, okay.
Adversely,
mean,
to
is
the
it-
point that it's required federal rules, and they're already in our
They're already
code.
there.
Yes.
So what we're doing tonight is not going to change the outcome of what we would have to do.
No.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you for all your work on this. This was not an easy subject, so well done, gentlemen.
Thank you.
If I can just say, I mean, the whole concept of this code amendment was to, as indicated, was to bring it in line with the model code by FEMA. And the problem is that FEMA had previous model codes. Communities substantially complied with this. We substantially complied with that. Substantial compliance means that each community was a little bit different. And so FEMA, from on high, says, we're tired of this. We want your code to look exactly like the one we processed, which required a lot of time to blend it into our code requirements and how our structure is set up. But as far as accepted, as indicated by Rob, functionally it's the same. It's just written in the FEMA language and their definitions. So
Okay. So we were pretty close to start with, is what you're saying?
We were.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Councilor Boop?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Espen. My question is, if I heard my friend Rap said, if we have to comply or not, my question is, if we don't, does it mean that if ever we have a disaster in our area, that FEMA would not intervene, or FEMA would let us in on our own? Does it mean that if we do not approve what they want us to do?
If we don't comply,
Yeah.
FEMA has a process whereby they would put the community on probation, which would eventually raise the insurance rates for the people that pay the flood insurance in the community. And at some point, if we continue not to comply, they can suspend us from the program. That violates state rules and it violates the federal rules. So there are potential hardships, and I don't know what they would do. I don't know of a community that's ever been actually suspended. I do know some that have been put on probation, and they've had to pay increased flood insurance rates. I don't know if they won't come to the rescue if you don't comply.
Yeah.
That's their prerogative.
Yes. Okay, so it means that we have to approve, and I will.
They bailed out New Orleans several times, so I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, so is it possible to move to approve?
Well, we have the hearing.
We have to.
We have the hearing, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the hearing, okay. No, my other question on the floodplain, is it only around the lake or does it go beyond?
It's around the lake, it's up the canal, it's on the Tualatin River, it's on the Willamette River, it's on Springbrook Creek, and a short segment of Lost Dog Creek.
That's what I wanted, yeah.
Yeah.
And, okay, so, okay.
Is the map work, is that work that will be done this year?
I'm sorry?
This map work, updating the maps that the city.
Updating the maps is a whole nother process that we really can't begin to get started on, much like the variance process, until we have an approved code in place. FEMA has said they will not let us move forward on any other actions until the code is approved. So
Okay.
we have discussed a map update on a portion of the canal. We've got a lot of data and research that we've done over the years relative to that section, and we will, at council direction, if that's the choice, move forward with analyzing that and seeing if that's necessary to do.
And we put that map together and then it's approved by
Well,
FEMA?
we hire a consultant to put that map together,
Okay,
yes.
and FEMA has to sign off?
Yeah, you have to have a firm that is qualified by FEMA to submit the appropriate data in their format for their review and approval.
So, yeah, 10 years later, right, we get the map. That's great.
Thank you.
Councilor Mans?
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done on this. It's a tremendously detailed amount of work, so very, very appreciative of it all over these, 2.5 years now? My question is really quite simple. I understand there's been a lot of talk about boathouses, and that has been very germane to our discussion with FEMA in the negotiation. How many actual boathouse renovations or build-outs do we see in a typical year, or have we seen? I know it's rather hard because we have COVID. Are there 2 or 10? Can you venture a guess?
I would say in a typical lake up year,
Right,
you might get 6.
6
Or 8.
throughout the year?
Yeah.
Okay,
In the lake down, I don't have them at my fingertip. There was approaching 30 of them this last year.
how many? I'm sorry,
It was approaching 30, I believe.
30, okay. So between 6 and 30?
Yeah.
Depending on lake up, lake down. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, thanks for all your work on this.
Okay, thank you. And so, just to verify, no further presentation as the applicant? You have no further presentation as the applicant? Okay. Then we will move to testimony. And I believe we have just the one person who signed up to testify?
Yes,
And-
Mark Heiser is joining us via Zoom.
Okay.
Mark, if you want to go ahead and unmute and turn your microphone on.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Heiser, and you have 5 minutes. And we welcome you here, and if you can try to keep track of your time, otherwise we'll let you know. Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and unmute Mark.
yeah. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Yes,
can
we
hear
are.
you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
wanted to make sure. So I was going to set my 5-minute timer, but I'll just watch down at the bottom. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the members of the council for the opportunity to present this evening. My reason for coming before the council is to request that the council, as the council moves forward with new regulations regarding the floodplain administration, that the city should have complete and accurate floodplain maps. The property owners in the floodplain along the Oswego Canal have floodplain lines that are up to 3 feet or more higher than they should be. My submission this evening includes information regarding significant errors in the city's flood management map area, Map A, that were presented to the Planning Commission on September 27th, 2021. My desire would be, if possible, and I know this needs to move forward, but the flood map should be accurate before doing any further changes. There are nearly 100 property owners adjacent to the canal that are currently affected by a floodplain map that is in error. As I noted in testimony to the Planning Commission, the City Floodplain Administrator has acknowledged that my testimony before them was not in error, and recognizing that the current floodplain map for these property owners are inaccurate. So I'm requesting that the city come into compliance with its own city code, section 50.05.11, part 4, map administration, subpart B, map error. The code reads, within 90 days of receiving information establishing a possible error in the existence or location of a flood management area, the city manager shall provide notice of public hearing at which the Planning Commission will review the error for compliance with this section. Notice of the hearing shall be sent to property owners who have property that will be included or withdrawn from the flood management area as a result of the change. Notice shall also be sent to owners of the property within 100 feet of the affected properties. Following the public hearing, the Planning Commission shall make a recommendation to the City Council as to whether the flood management boundary should be changed. This is not a possible error. At the Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission assured me that they would bring this issue before the City Council. Why? Because they were presented with evidence that there is a significant error and not just a possible error in the floodplain map. At the South Shore Bridge, there's the equivalent of a 3-foot high dam that extends across the lake, because when they adjusted the floodplain maps in 2012, it stopped there. So that was never adjusted. There have also been several other things in my testimony that you can look at that would also affect and improve the flow down the canal. As noted in the past, a 3-foot dam on the lake, through other studies, a 3-foot dam on the Tuolumne River, the Lake Corps Dam, actually affects the flood elevation in downtown Tuolumne, which I believe is like 3 to 5 miles upstream. So there is an effect. I'd like and hope that the city will take this seriously and can move this forward fast. Many property owners could be removed from the floodplain. Even more owners could see greater use of their property, as portions of their property will be unusable under the new code without adjustment. Something as simple as replacing an air conditioner or condensing unit could be affected by the floodplain line. And those of us who are paying flood insurance have just seen an 18% increase in our flood insurance costs. And we will see another 18% increase every single year for, I believe it's another 5 to 7 years. So while the floodplain elevation was reduced by 3 feet for the main lake, sadly the residents adjacent to the canal and along the canal were left behind. It's time for the city to follow its own code, hold the hearing, and please move this forward quickly. The city staff has been aware of this for well over 5 years. It's time to move forward. It's a little disappointing that, I'm hearing that working on a lot of stuff for people with boathouses and how to keep theirs nice and fancy, but those of us who live upstream along the canal or just off the canal don't even have an accurate floodplain map. The remainder of materials outline the 3 major adjustments that have not been included in the current flood analysis for the canal. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and thank you for your consideration tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Heiser. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Of Mr. Heiser. Oh, we're going to finish the hearing. One sec. Okay, Ms. Linder, is there anyone else to testify?
No, Mayor.
Okay. There's now opportunity for rebuttal. Mr. Amsbury or?
Well, to speak generally to Mr. Heiser's comments, we don't disagree that there is a difference in flood elevations in the mapping at the canal at the entrance to the lake. When the Lake Corps rebuilt their spillway, they were required to perform what's called a letter of map revision. So in order to build the spillway improvements, they had to get pre-approval from FEMA in the form of a conditional letter of map revision. And that basically spells out what they propose to do, what benefit it is supposed to have in the area that it's supposed to cover. And at that time, it was decided amongst Lake Corps engineers and FEMA that the cutoff for that map revision would be the mouth of the canal. So they rebuilt the spillway, they redid their study, submitted all the as-built information, and the maps were revised. So there is what you would call maybe a discrepancy between the actual flood level of the lake during the 100-year event and the canal at that point. And in conversations with the engineer from the firm that worked for the Lake Corporation, he said that there is a slight difference that migrates upstream to about the South Shore Bridge. So what Mr. Heiser is proposing is that we remap the canal with all the information that we have. He's talked about some other issues that I don't like the word dispute, but I don't necessarily agree with, and we have studies to show that he may not have all the information necessary to demonstrate how much material was dredged out of the canal, how the head gate was built, and the engineering reports that show that it does not present a rise in the flood elevations. So that would all feed into moving forward with the process of a letter of map revision for that portion of the canal. That would be laid out in the engineering analysis and determine exactly where those changes need to be made and how expansive that they were. So.
Okay, thank you. With that, we're going to close the testimony portion of the public hearing. Councilor Winman, you had a question?
I just have a question. The question then is, if we pass this tonight, which it looks like we need to move forward, do we have any sort of a time frame that we would be resolving some of the issues that have been brought up? I mean, are we looking at another year or another 6 months or 3 months?
Well, I guess I'm not clear on the process. The planning commission said that it was going to become a goal and a work item, and that they would ask the council to proceed with a letter of map revision. Ultimately, it comes down a directive from you folks to engineering staff to move forward with this.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you.
Have a year to talk about that.
Yeah, it's perfect timing for our 2022 goals, so thank you.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor?
No, yes.
Mayor
Yes,
over
Mr.
here,
Moon.
sorry. As planner Espy indicated, the council report usually provides for tentative approval and direction to staff to adopt findings and bring it back at the next meeting. The only testimony you've heard was what the testimony was presented to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission adopted findings, which are on page 51, I think, of your council report attachments, which finds that there's nothing to do about the map right now. That's something to do in the future. If the council agrees with those findings that the Planning Commission made, I think the Planning Commission could go ahead and adopt the findings that were sent out to the council, which would adopt the record that you have before you and conclude that it complies with the criteria. And then we could just adopt the ordinance tonight and not have to bring back additional findings, because that's all it's going to say, is the same thing that was presented to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So that's an option to grant, if there are no revisions to the ordinance by the council.
Right. Okay.
So, Mr. Boone, if I'm understanding you properly, the motion would simply be move to approve LU 20-005, directing staff to prepare a final ordinance and findings, or just leave the ordinance and findings off?
Well, it would be a motion to approve the findings,
Right.
which were.
Motion to approve the findings of LU 20-005
And to adopt ordinance 2847.
and to adopt ordinance 2847.
Right.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Is there any discussion? No. Okay, well, let's call the roll, please, Ms. Linder.
Okay, Mayor Buck,
Yes.
Councilors Rapp,
Yes.
Mans,
Yes.
and Boot,
Yes.
Wenlin,
Yes.
Wen,
Yes.
and Burdick.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-0.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Next meeting, could you bring everything that you?
And for Mr. Heiser, we know we hear the request on the map, and we'll take it under consideration as we set goals for this year. Great. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next on the agenda is a study session on the Chapter 10 of the City Charter, the amendments. I invite Director Anderholm, Parks and Rec, to join us for this discussion. Lead us in the discussion, actually.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Ivan Anderholm, Parks and Recreation Director. This evening, I'm just before you to have a work session on the effects of the Chapter 10 Charter Amendment, which was the Citizen Measure 3-568 that passed it on November 2nd. As you're all aware, that charter amendment has an effect on 15 designated properties that were designated in the amendment. Those 15 properties are properties that are all natural, and in some cases are natural with some developed elements in them. Unlike a referendum or city initiative that directs us, the city, to do something into action, the looking at this initiative, what it does is it restricts the types of improvements that we can make on these 15 designated properties. So as far as the effects or how we will implement this, the implementation is to review all development proposals of any type that take place in these 15 properties. First, by describing what those are. Secondarily, by taking them to the city attorney's office for interpretation against the amendment. In basics, the 15 properties are listed out in my staff report. They range anywhere from about 1.3 acres all the way up to 52 acres, I believe, being the largest, and restrict development. The specific development that they restrict from being built in these areas are athletic facilities, parking lots, roads and trails for motorized vehicles, commercial logging, harvesting of trees, above ground structure or facility that's inconsistent or impairs with the natural conditions, telecommunication facilities, and hardscape trails, meaning asphalt, concrete, or other poured in place. Allowed development in this amendment allow for trails for hiking, jogging, horseback, and bicycling, i.e. soft surface trails, picnic facilities, sanitary facilities, benches, interpretive displays, and boardwalks. I do want to point out that also allowed by this amendment is development that's included in adopted master plans prior to November 2nd, 2021. I sent out an email earlier to council distribution with an electronic copy, but this is my presentation this evening. I have a copy of it, the one and only, which is, it is the Canal Area Master Plan, which covers Canal Acres, Bryant Woods, River Run 1 and River Run 2, adopted in February of 2001. And that is actually the only master plan that we have for these properties. Also allowed are maintenance activities on the existing facilities that are in these. So the prohibited facilities, so if we have a parking lot within one of these sites, we are allowed to maintain that as long as our maintenance and activity does not further impair the natural condition. Part of the discussion on this is really there are three areas the effects take place, or the effects are going to affect the community. The first one is parking access for all users. A number of these sites do not have parking within the site, and with this amendment, we will not be able to make those type of improvements regardless of the surface. Parking is not allowed. The second area that I want to point out that we may run into a negative effect on this is replacement of utilities. And in specific, I'm thinking of water infrastructure, water tanks. The way that activity is taking place, and this will take some legal interpretation, and I'm not a lawyer, but we have two great ones that work for us, is that the most likely case of replacement of reservoirs that are in these areas would be to build a reservoir adjacent to the existing and then remove the existing. That will not be allowed without modification of this amendment. And then the third point of an effect of this is the replacement or improvement to telecommunications facilities. And when I'm talking about this, we do in a number of these areas, we do have telecommunications facilities that are related directly to some of our utility infrastructure. And as technology improves or does not improve, but we are in need for better towers or better antennas within those. My understanding of this is that we will not be able to do that because that would be considered a further impairment of the natural condition. Moving forward with this, I stated it a little bit earlier, but I'll restate it. Our future process is that we've identified these 15 properties. We know what these properties are. We have notified other departments, engineering, public works, that may have, and actually public safety as well, of the charter amendment, and let them know that if they identify any type of project that takes place in these, that please contact Parks, which is a regular thing they do anyway, but then we'll ask for a description of the activity that they're proposing, and then we'll take that proposal to the city attorney's office for review and opinion, if it is in compliance or is not in compliance with the charter amendment. With that, I'll answer any questions you have, or I'll try to, and if I can't, I will refer you to Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Randho. Okay, I have a couple questions. So in the, you know, when we put forth the city's version of this charter amendment, we were going to adopt maps. You know, that was the thing. And one of the differences, we're going to adopt maps, and citizen measures, there's no maps, right? So what's the consequence of this no maps thing? I think we have clearly identified the properties. I know we had clearly identified the properties, but we're not adopting maps, right?
We are not, and if you look at the language, and again, I think this might be more of a Mr. Liu's question than myself, but in the definition of the different properties, it has definitions like comprises of 2 parcels owned by roughly 10.8 acres, more or less. What we've noticed on this is that, for instance, one of the park properties is listed as West Waluga Park. Mm-hmm. And in West Waluga Park, the definition is 22.8 acres, more or less. West Waluga Park, in fact, is about 36.2 acres, more or less. So again, as we look at that, and if there is a proposed development in that, we will obviously take that and take it to the city attorney's office and try to come up with a legal opinion of what exactly was meant by the 22.8 acres, because it doesn't encompass the entire property of that particular park as we identify it.
Okay, so we were going to adopt maps just to make it very clear. Mm-hmm. The parks are the parks. The language in the citizens measure is just more vague, basically.
In some regards, yes, yeah,
regards.
Absolutely.
So in regards to the public utilities then, is there no way for us to kind of condemn that use, the restriction, you know, if it's for public good?
Right, they would have to go to a vote then at that point, so.
A vote for the people?
Right.
Oh, for the condemnation.
Pursuant to the charter language that passed, yes.
And then, in regards to the removal of trees for, be it safety reasons or habitat restoration, allowed?
Yes, it is. It's actually specifically allowed to allow us to do restoration, invasive removal, and fire mitigation. There's language in it that allows us to do that. Where we run into a conflict on that is if that could be deemed as commercial logging, and initially I've had a conversation with Jason about that, and we don't think that anything that we do is, because we're not, the intent of removing the tree is not for the harvest of the tree. Right. It's mitigating a risk.
Right. So, okay. Thank you. Okay. There's further questions here from the councilors. Councilor Boop, you're first.
Thank you, Ivan. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my problem, you know, everybody know my take on this thing, and like I say, it's vox populi, vox deis, the consequences of anything we do. But how, like, about the parking access for users? And it's a question for Jason. How, if we, because parks also are places where people should access. It should not be just we've been having complaints from neighbors saying that people are parking on their things, and I mean, we will be cornered between neighbors saying, hey, why are you parking on our street? And why there is no parking available, for example, on any park, if you go to Portland, you go to some parks, there are places where you can park your car. So what should we do? Should we just say, oh, there's a vote, so we cannot do it? Is it?
It would be, right, it would be against the law. It would require, again, for this to go back to the voters and amend it. So currently, the way that they phrase it is you cannot construct or develop any parking lot. The exception being you could redo an existing lot so long as you didn't expand it. But you cannot build any new parking lots in any of these areas.
Okay. And so how about also replacement of utilities? Because these are also safety measures. These are things that have been there, and the spirit of the law of why folks voted for that was that we want to preserve our parks. It doesn't mean that preserving the parks does mean, for example, go and logging in the things. No one in their right mind will do that. And, building apartments in a park, no one is going to do. But so replacing or improvement of telecommunication, that's a big issue. So if we are faced with that, should we have to wait for a vote of maybe a year, or if it's an emergency like on fixing this, what should we do? Is it still the same process?
Correct. For telecommunications facilities, yes. They specifically included telecommunications facilities in the language. Other utilities, if they were underground and could be constructed without disturbing the natural conditions of the nature preserve, in theory, you could put underground utilities through there. That's something, again, that we would take on a case-by-case basis.
So then, is it wise that next November we put a charter amendment that, like, specifically, not just to go about the thing, but specifically give the city or any entities that looking for the safety of our community to say, like, but specifically these things that the park staff, are facing, those problems. I'm not politicking here, and, I don't want people interpret what, but these are problems. And when we were voting, most of the voters didn't know that these things were going to be problems. So is it wise to put another amendment very soon and even talk to the other party and tell them this is problems, these are problems, how can we solve it, and put, no, it's something I just want to go clear and open on this, because we cannot just continue. Either we are a government and we are governing the body for the safety, and that's the reason, for example, me 100% why I was elected. I wasn't elected to be here and not be able to do things that we have to do, which means like doing the best for our city and for our citizens, and these are part of that. If we cannot do it, we have to find a way to go away, and it's to put another amendment. I'm ready to meet with the other group or anyone and tell them these are the reason why. This is not politicking. We just want the city to know we cannot do this because of this, and we have exception of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. That's
okay. Thank you, Councilor Rath.
Thank you, Councilor Mahboub. That was awesome. I appreciate that. Couple questions. What is considered soft surface?
In terms of this amendment is specific to asphalt and concrete being hardscape and prohibited. So it would be gravel. Gravel would be considered soft surface, natural surface, chips, wood chips,
Yeah.
and anything like that, as long as it's not asphalt or concrete.
And my understanding is someone in a motorized or self-propelled wheelchair would not be able to use that to move around, correct? Or it'd be very challenging, at least.
Depending on
Anything's possible. but-
Depending on the terrain, but there is in ADA there is provision for using natural materials that would be considered soft surface that
So there is a
are
way-
compliant. Yes, yeah. So you could do a decomposed granite that's like in demonstration gardens. A lot of times you'll see a decomposed granite material that's rolled in, or we have some over at Woodmont.
Okay.
Natural, yeah. And Headley pathway as well. So it would be that, it's not ideal, but it does meet the requirements.
Okay. The reservoir on Cook's Butte, what happens if that ruptures and explodes water all over are we able to fix it? Or are we gonna allow everybody's house to flood?
We are able to fix it. We're not able to change it in a way that would further above ground structure that would further impair or be inconsistent with the natural conditions.
So we'd be able to repair it so it's still usable and?
Yeah.
Okay. So Masen started going into what I was kind of feeling too, the stress of safety of our community. And what I'm about to say is not really a question. It's not a question at all. It's more of a comment, not to us, but really to all the people that voted for that charter amendment in the vote. And so I'd like this to go on the record, which it will obviously. But for those of you who voted for this, you were duped and lied to about the unintended consequences of what this does for the city. And it puts lives in danger. For those of you who felt that why would we need a tower in Cook's Butte? Why would we need further telecommunications in the city? There would never be anything at any of our schools that would necessitate pinnacle communications for our police officers and firemen and women. 3 weeks ago, I'm choked up because my kids are in school. So our police officers needed that communication equipment to keep our kids safe at Lake Oswego High School. Because of the lies that certain people in our community are spreading about what the city does, we are extremely putting our kids in danger. And if you voted for this, shame on you. Do your homework. Don't listen to people who are loud on the internet and on Nextdoor. You are hurting the community. You are hurting our ability to protect people and our kids. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Nguyen?
Thank you, Mayor. So I think that, this past election, right, and we had this citizens initiative passed. I think that, there's certainly some unintended consequences, and that we're realizing after this is this is passed. I think that certainly having an election during a time of COVID and not be able to get out and actually have face-to-face and the interaction to really understand some of the implications of the things we're voting for, I think it kind of doesn't serve us well. And so I think that a lot of ways, I think that when these ordinances and these citizen initiatives, I think that there's the spirit of the law. I think, as Councilor Abub had mentioned, the spirit of the law is, I think, something that may be well-intentioned, but I think that we don't understand the full implications of it, much in the same way that we are often grapple with some of the facts of, for example, HB 2001. The spirit of the law is one thing, but then the implementation on the ground and how do we address the day-to-day needs of it sometimes aren't evident at the time that the law is made or the ordinance is passed. And so I would encourage all of us and staff to continue to investigate this, kind of look at what are all the unintended consequences, and there's some contradictions too. I think that I think we all can stand behind protecting our natural areas. And I think as we've often talked about, if the most controversial thing in our community is protecting our parks, I think that's a great thing. It means that we care very much about our community. So I think we should continue to be looking at all these ways that, on the one hand, the spirit of the law is meant to protect the natural areas, but then there's some unintended consequences and unintended contradictions that we need to be able to address and be able to talk about that. And as we understand more of it, potentially explore the option of maybe convening another this time around, getting more community involvement, getting council involved, getting staff involved early on, so we can start to maybe offer an additional amendment to some of these things that were passed to address some of the contradictions. Because I think that one of the things I just saw is like, on the one hand, sanitary facilities are allowed, yet above ground structures are not. And so I don't think we're in a third world country where we're allowed to have sanitary facilities that are underground. And so those are the kind of things where I'm sure that that's not what we meant, but I think that those are becoming more and more apparent. So again, I think that there are those that weren't able to see the full picture, and I think that not having the face-to-face interaction and not having the full kind of robust and live discussions that we're used to having when we make these types of decisions, I think did not yield the best of results as we'd hoped. And so hopefully in this next few months, and as we continue later in this year, that maybe there is an opportunity for us to put something forward to address some of these unintended consequences and contradictions that are arising because of this ordinance that was, not the ordinance, the charter amendment that was voted on. So that's what I would encourage. I think that it's not a time that we should continue to be divisive about it, but I think it's a time for us to be able to come together and recognize, hey, we're all very, very passionate about our natural areas and what we have here, and how do we best protect that, and how do we ensure that the best intentions and the spirit of law is addressed, and how do we implement these changes on the ground.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Wendland.
Well, I would say that I agree with my esteemed colleagues 100%. As an example, Councilor Rapp brought up the situation at Lake Oswego High School, and anytime you endanger citizens, especially our most vulnerable, our kids, by taking a short-sighted approach, especially what bothers me most about this is that we reached out to the group that was sponsoring this measure so we could help fix some of these issues. So I wanted on the record that we worked and tried to work with them, and in the spirit of our measure, it was very similar. The difference were we knew a few nuances that were important to the community that we needed to correct. And so, as I told people, this measure was a B, if you were rated on a scale of A, B, C, D, and the city measure was an A, because we had some time to reflect on the vulnerabilities of this policy. And I think it's gives us, this council and the city staff, a opportunity to reflect, figure out issues that we have to have corrected. And I'm in full support. I know this is a work session, so we can just talk freely. But on our council goal to maybe figure out the refinements and put something back on the ballot in November, or we can't get it done by May, but to fix some of these issues. And I think the people at Lake Oswego, it was confusing for them. And to Councilor Wen's point, it was during COVID and people were kind of not necessarily in the proper campaign modes that they're used to. But just as an example, we had vandalism at a couple of our parks this fall. And one of the methods that we would help to prevent future vandalism would be to install cameras. And where we had cameras, we were able to identify the people who did the vandalism. Under this measure, it would not allow us to install cameras, and we were not able to catch it at this other park where we had damage because we couldn't install security devices. And that's just costing the taxpayers, what, $100,000, 50? This was substantial damage, right? So, and the fact that you can't order something and get it the next day, you have to wait 12 months until the ship comes into port to get what we need for replacement. So this has real consequences for our community, and I guess my big picture is that I would like to be an efficient and a safety-oriented city, and we can correct anything if we want to put it on the ballot for any of these parks. But the citizens need to know that that costs money, that costs time and effort, education, everything else. So as an example, if we have a water system that needs improvement in our parks, that we could replace sensors or some electronic equipment that might reduce costs for staff. It would be a better delivery system for using our precious water resources, all kinds of different things, lighting, whatever it is. We can't do those improvements unless we take it out to the voters. And if you think this is confusing, wait till we go out and say, hey, we need to replace a timer system for our watering system with a E-6612 water system. They'll be so confused and wondering, are we stupid as a council to put something like this on a ballot? So unintended consequences, these are the things that we need. So I'm all in favor of putting this on our council goal for next year to help make some resolution to this. So.
Thank you, Councilwoman Linda. Councilor Mans?
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for all of their comments about how important not only our natural areas are, but people's right to use them and people's right to be safe in our community. My question is simply, what direction would staff like in moving forward, if any? I know this is a work session, but will you bring back additional findings or reports, or give us a little timeline here?
No, I think this was just an opportunity for us to make sure that we all understand sort of what the path on implementation, that there isn't actually anything we need to do.
Right.
It is simply the process that the Parks Department is going to follow to make sure we are faithful in implementing the charter provisions.
Well, thank you, and I hope you do come back before us, obviously, if there's something that you see that's substantive, so that we can continue to address as we can. As you pointed out, the law is the law. So thank you so much for the work that you put into this.
I appreciate the comments from the colleagues here, from you all, and it's a good lesson, for us, and a lot of us weren't even here, at the time when we talked about that, radio communications tower, how that really, the emergency communications tower really, got away from us, and people call it a cell phone tower, which is kind of ironic because cell phone equipment isn't even on these towers anymore. It's on our utility poles in the right of way. They're tiny things. However, the equipment, the actual radios that police and firefighters use are on towers, that we think of in that way. And, it is our duty as leaders to provide for the safety of the community, is paramount. And these two measures were so similar in all the ways the community really want, in terms of how they protect the areas. Of course, the city had more areas, that it protected, but, by and large, we're talking about the same parts of town. We're talking about the same values in terms of preserving these, the health and enhancing the health of the natural areas, providing areas that are accessible, to members of the community. And it's these small areas where we really differed on but very consequential, like an emergency radio communications tower. And I think there is way forward, specifically carving out, I don't think anyone wants cell phone towers, right, in the parks, but for radio emergency communications, well, it's a different story. And I would imagine most members of the community would say, well, yeah, absolutely, these are two different things. And of course, we know that people were sold on the idea that this was, corporations out making money, cell phone towers, in our parks. And of course, that was never at all the case. I don't think a single one of us would be in favor of ever, doing something like that. And of course, then the tweaks for the infrastructure that we do have, running through natural areas. We have many different services through the cities that do, run through our parks and are just needed that way because of how water flows, gravity and where the topography of the city and whatnot. So being able to maintain those is important, critical. And we either kind of go out and fix it, right? Or we're going to be going out for single votes, every time, which is, doesn't seem like to be a great option. So we can, further continue the discussion at our retreat now in February. But I appreciate the comments. Yeah, it does seem like something that I think we could go about in an engaging way with the community that creates an even more positive result than this. So thank you, Mr. Anderholm. Oh, excuse me, yeah, Councilor Wynn.
I guess I do have a request of staff is that, that as you are continuing to work through some of these issues, if you could kind of keep an inventory of what you're running across, and that would be really helpful to us as we are trying to think about how do we address that, through a council goal or potential some other action later on. So if you keep a running tally of these types of things, because I think it's much more effective when we actually have some solid, concrete examples rather than theoreticals. What if this and what if that? So that'd be very helpful. That'd be my request.
Okay.
Yeah, and just for clarification, there are two projects that were in the works that were affected by the passage of this. One of them being the parking down off of Childs Road on the lower portion of Stevens Meadow. That project was fully engineered, designed with full approval from Clackamas County, and was actually in the bid stage. But because of the passage of this and the lack of a true master plan, which is another technical unintended consequence of this, is that a single development that we do in parks, technically we don't take through a master planning process because it's a single phase development. So within the city limits, it's usually done through a conditional use. So we don't actually take it through what is technically known as a master plan. So that project was canceled. And then another project that we had begun relates to the acquisition of the Yates property and a reconfiguring of the pathway, the asphalt pathway that travels through the existing Hallinan Woods property from O'Brien Street to Hallinan Elementary. For years, we've been looking for solutions on how to reroute that pathway so that it doesn't go really steep into the ravine. Also to improve the quality of the stream because it's in a restricted culvert where the pathway crosses. And with the passage of this, the options of moving that hard surface pathway, which school children use, is pretty much on the shelf because though the new Yates property is not included in this amendment, the new acreage, so we could build a pathway there, we would have to connect through the existing Hallinan Woods property to the existing head at O'Brien if we were to redirect that pathway. So we do have some ideas of how we can do ADA compliance and maybe make some improvements there, but at this point, we've put that project on the shelf as an effect directly related to this amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the update. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have the consent agenda, and just there was one last minute change to Resolution 2201, which is the Liaison and Committee assignments for 2022. And we had to switch. Councilor Verdict was assigned to two boards that meet at the same day and time. So we moved Councilor Boop to Historic Resource Advisory Board and Councilor Verdict to the 50+ Advisory Board. Okay. The 50+, you know, that 50+, I think it needs a new name. Yeah, I think of a couple of my colleagues must thinking about that 50. You know, it's just like, what's next?
Yeah, what's
The Cemetery Advisory
40 is
Board,
the new
you know?
50, I think.
Right. 50 pups, I mean, you're almost there. I mean, it's rough.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, is there, well, no, we don't. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Did Councilor Burdick say aye?
Aye.
Okay, all right. Okay, that consent agenda passes 7-0. Now information from council, please let me know if anyone has anything. I'm trying to think if I have anything. Well, are you gonna share about the PG? Or? Okay, we'll do that. Okay, does anyone else have any information?
Well,
Okay, we're almost there, almost there.
is this just general comments from council or information?
Yes.
Just, we talked about, I think on an email stream, about the garbage pickup, and
But not any serial way.
you had that on your list. So they didn't do it again today. So no snow, but no service. So for just recycling, they picked up garbage but not recycling. But anyway, if you
No,
give 'em
so
gifts.
here's what I wanted to let you know about, look, if you don't mind, Your Honor.
Oh, yeah.
I have two things to update you on. One is garbage, and the other, my job is so glamorous. The other is PGE. The first is Republic Services did have problems getting to people's houses last week because of snow and ice, but then they have, like many providers, also begun to have staffing shortfalls. And so they have pledged that when they have had to delay a pickup on some customers, they have pledged that when they get to you, they will pick up whatever you have for no extra charge. I will also say that one of the things we learned from them today is that a lot of customers in Lake Oswego have been customers of theirs for a really super long time and probably have got new phones since they originally signed up, and that they're not reaching all the customers through their notification system because you might have put in an old landline and then gotten a cell phone and discontinued your landline, or maybe just don't have voicemail on your landline, and you need to go and update your phone number with Republic. So anyway, they are having substantial staffing issues. They are trying to do outreach to folks. We have also offered them the city communication tools as a way to try to increase outreach. So we're trying to get to customers. I'm really sorry. I especially know that at my house in the holidays, there's always a lot of extra paper and some boxes. Sometimes there might be extra glass bottles that might have had things. And so I understand the importance of picking things up. And they're trying, but I just want us all to recognize that it's a region-wide staffing shortage that they're facing right now. So, but if you are on social media or you talk to folks, if you could let them know that one of the things they could do that might help get information out is update their telephone number with Republic Services so that because they are sending out information over their telephone service. I've gotten 2 voicemail messages from them. So.
And they often start with an Arizona.
Yeah, it's like it comes in from Phoenix because their corporate headquarters are in Phoenix, Arizona. So the phone number comes in from Phoenix. But even if you deny it, it should still roll to your voicemail, but only if you have an updated telephone number. So, okay, so that's issue.
I do think it's great if we can, because they're our only supplier.
Yes.
We should be the city conduit with our information.
Yeah, and Councilor Manns and the mayor know that we've had some fairly frank conversations with them in the last few days about making sure that they're not just that they're providing a higher level of customer service in the circumstance that they're dealing with. But
Right.
I wish I could blame the weather for everything, but I have to add, in this case, COVID, which is rapidly not funny. We also, the mayor and I had a discussion with senior leadership at PGE today, and I want to tell you about 3 things that we talked about with them. The first is trees. I am sure that you all have seen the Asplund trucks around town. What we all learned last February with the winter storm is that throughout this part of Oregon, PGE power lines are highly vulnerable to trees. And of course, since we have such an amazing urban forest and a really robust tree canopy in our community, we're extra special as far as they're concerned. But I think the question in the last few months has been, how can we do a better job of coordinating the actual trimming and activity that they're doing? Because I've gotten a number of complaints about the quality of the trimming, about some trees that have been topped, about trees that have been trimmed for power lines, but not trimmed for telecom. And so I think we're going to try to do a short-term process with them where we maybe have a more constructive engagement between public works staff, planning staff, and PGE, so that we have sort of a better plan on how to tackle the work that they need to do. And then we also talked to them on that same topic on a sort of maybe a longer range conversation about how do we manage the need to have reliable power and our desire to have a robust and healthy urban forest together. And so more of a community conversation about managing trees near power lines, because I think we will continue to have conflicts if we don't have a shared sense of how we're going to manage that particular issue. So it was really great. So it's one of the things I want to talk to you about as part of your council goals. And they suggested, and Councilor Mans will probably like this, that maybe the initial part of the conversation could be about city-owned properties, which might feed really into a natural resource management plan for city-owned property. Okay. The second thing we talked to them about is about redundancy for power at our water treatment facilities. I shared that Director Rooney and her staff are doing an evaluation of how we can make it easier to have generator backups at those plants as part of our ARPA projects, but that it's possible we won't want to go all the way to buying or installing or permitting, more importantly, the generators in those other communities. And so we talked to them about whether there's alternative ways for them to supply generation in the event of an emergency. They also shared that they're working on hardening in those places where there are dual feeds. They're trying to harden at least one of the 2 feeds going into facilities like our water plants, so that it's harder for that for us to completely lose power. And then there was a third thing that was in my head. Oh, we talked a lot about electric vehicle charging and sort of what's the options for PGE, especially because the Federal Infrastructure Act included a boatload, I think is the correct term, of dollars for electric vehicle charging throughout our country. Is what's the process for local jurisdictions and utilities to work together to try to roll out a higher level of electric vehicle charging, especially for multifamily projects in communities. I don't think that we didn't reach as many good conclusions on that conversation, but at least we had an opening salvo. Is there anything else I missed on that?
Well, no, and PGE, they recognize that, in some other types of communities, they're doing work that's going to have an impact on, the resiliency. They've made investments in certain things. But in Lake Oswego specifically, with just the nature of the community, all of the old trees, in the right-of-way, the above-ground lines and all of that we will, continue to experience the same issues year after year, after year, and they want to provide a very high level of service. So they're committed to working hand-in-hand with the city on a comprehensive approach to how we can do a better job in ensuring a resilient system, going forward.
So are they gonna put all the systems underground then?
No.
Sidewalks, big ones.
No,
But it is that.
And honestly, for me, I have patience with PGE. They're doing a very poor job in Lake Oswego. And like telling us that we have to relive what we lived last year is unacceptable. If it's that, we can find another power company and have them run Lake Oswego, because it's
not quite that easy.
But listen, we are very old smart folks. We're not going to cut our trees. It's their job. They know where
They are cutting trees right now, and part of the problem is they're cutting them just for power, not for the health of the tree.
But we cannot justify, it's their job. We are paying them our money. It's a billion-dollar company. They have the obligation to fix this thing. There is no playing with these companies. We don't do it with the restaurant here. If a restaurant has food poisoning, we close them down the next day. These guys should be closed down because of what happened last year. We cannot come and say, oh, it's gonna happen, because it's not our trees, it's their fault. If you are building a power line under a tree, it's not the fault of the tree, it's your fault. And for that reason, we need to keep them accountable and have them fix it ASAP right now. We cannot leave the February again. We have to be clear with them. That's what we are here for. We're not working for PGE, we work for Lake Oswego.
No, I agree with you. I think that trying to increase the reliability of power service to our residents, their customers, is absolutely our number one objective.
Yeah.
But we also have to recognize that we all have financial constraints.
Right.
So
not them, because we are paying them. They have money. It's not free. The power is, as a matter of fact, it's even expensive what we're paying.
Well, it's actually pretty low.
Even to do solar or to do green energy, they're asking us to pay for it. I got their call and I talked to them. So we cannot defend them. They have to upgrade their things and do better job.
Agreed completely.
Yeah.
So
Not to beat this thing to death, but I did have a question about, so you mentioned that PGE is only trimming branches and trees that get in the way of the power lines. Because I did have a call with somebody at PGE last week, and they said, how high is that line? I said it's about 20 feet off the ground. Oh, that's not ours. Ours is always 45 feet or above. And so those are things that I think.
Again, that's a concern, in part because not only are they leaving the branches in the telecommunication line, so they're essentially they're deciding that we don't get telecommunication service if there's snow and ice. But if that branch takes that line down, it's going to take the whole pole down, and so it's so short-sighted. So that's one of the reasons I think increasing our level of coordination and communication with them about what they're trying to accomplish. Also, I found several places in town where they've just topped trees, and that's not okay. And so, and if they're trimming, and they admitted to us, I think, that they're not using arborists to evaluate the trees. If they're trimming in such a way where they're essentially killing the tree, I'd rather be having a conversation with them about a tree removal rather than having to make the property owner come back 2 or 3 years later to remove the tree that they essentially killed through how they trimmed it. And so I agree with Councilor Mavoop about holding them accountable. I just want to do it I'm just not as fired up as he is. That's clearly what's happening, but he's absolutely correct that it's their responsibility. They need to do it right. And we need to hold them accountable for doing it right.
Yeah. And it's a partnership, and we share the same goals. And they're in the same position we're often in too, where they hear from folks who think they're trimming the trees too much. And so they need to trim the trees to provide, resiliency, and neighbors complain because they trim the trees. So they don't trim the trees, and the neighbors complain when the power goes out. So, we all play a role. And I think that's why the partnership is important, because we can help them to do their job a little bit better. So, okay. Yes. Yes.
I wanted to ask of staff, and I don't know if this could be answered now. If not, we'll move it forward. What exactly are franchise agreements with the various internet service providers and cable providers and broadband providers are in the city, as that mechanism that you pointed out is often it's 25 feet or whatever the case may be, and has grown in breadth over the years as more cable is strung, what responsibility they have in any of this as a franchisee.
Why don't I bring that conversation? Because you remember a few years ago, you changed how you manage utilities in the right of way from a franchise to a different kind of licensing agreement. So let me bring that.
Thank you.
Because I don't know
Appreciate
off the
it.
top of my head.
Yeah, not for tonight's discussion. Thank you.
We kept, I-205, the tolling, we keep talking about the tolling, so, sorry, ongoing thing. But basically,
It starts next week.
well, we had talked about ODOT is requesting that the region amend the regional transportation plan and to make an amendment that is required by the federal government for them to then move forward on the implementation of the tolling program. And so since they've made that request, there's been various meetings and discussions taking place. And basically these advisory or these votes at the regional table, so at MPAC and JPAC, were to take place this month here in January. And both of those bodies are delaying the votes, and there's a kind of rather unanimous, or just about as unanimous as it's going to be, support for putting together a more going back to ODOT. We don't really feel like ODOT has done, we heard from them, they came to our council meeting, we don't feel like they have done the work that's required to show us that what they're asking for even complies with the goals of our regional transportation plan, even the intent of the legislature when passing this legislation to relieve congestion and provide alternative modes of transportation. We may put something together for our next meeting in January, a resolution, so we can all get behind. We're trying to get the cities, especially in Clackamas, but throughout the region, everyone on the same page. So there's a concrete ask. This is this is the deep sausage making of these kind of these important projects. It's good to see that. The rest of the region, our leaders in Multnomah and Washington counties kind of getting behind those of us here in Clackamas, especially in our city, and even more so Oregon City and West Linn, whose residents would be greatly impacted by this tolling project. And to reiterate, we all recognize the need for the project, and especially the first part of the I-205 project, Phase 1A, which is the Abernathy Bridge. Making that bridge seismically sound is a critical project. So we don't want to stop the project. And ODOT is kind of presenting the region with a false dilemma that if we don't move forward on the tolling, they can't do the project, and it's just not true. They have other funding. They need to get creative. We want them to go back to the drawing board in that regard and continue moving forward on the same timeline to start Phase 1A, while they then work on a comprehensive, region-wide plan for how they're going to pay and congestion price all of these projects throughout the region. So that's kind of what's going on there. So more to come. We may have something before us.
So you're saying that we want to look at it as a metro area more so that all tolling starts together? Is that kind of
That's what everyone wants.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Just to start
if we're going to
at
do
the
it,
same time.
which it sounds like we have to
Exactly.
at least get it done so that we're not just a guinea pig.
There's no projects without the tolling, but the region really wants it to have that value pricing model built in. And if it's just right now on I-205, it's just a toll to pay for a road.
Right.
When you have no alternatives, we have no public transportation over here. What are people supposed to do other than get on I-205? Nothing. Or divert.
Right.
So, which of course is the other issue. So, did I get that pretty much? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now we have executive session. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. Lake Oswego City Council will now meet under authority of ORS 192.660 sub 2E to consider deliberations with those designated to negotiate real property transactions and consider records that are exempt by law from public inspection. Public is not invited to attend, but members of the media may attend.
Wonderful. Okay. With that, we're going to take a yes, we're going to go in there, but we'll take a 10-minute recess before we reconvene in the side room. This will, just to note, this will conclude the broadcast portion of the meeting. So we won't come back after the executive session. So Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you.
For crowd control purposes.